Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, March 7th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Asa Winstanley, Jon Elmer, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 153 of Israel's genocide in Gaza as we enter the 6th month. We have another packed show for you today, including an interview with a pediatric critical care specialist who just got back from Gaza, where he was treating babies and children in intensive care. Also, we'll be joined by journalist Bryce Greene to discuss the role of corporate media in shielding the U.S. public from Israel's official narrative of October 7th. And we'll have a full roundup of videos from the Palestinian armed resistance with Jon Elmer. But first, some of the news that we've been covering at the Electronic Intifada. At least 20 people, including elders and children, have died as a result of Israel's accelerating engineered starvation of the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Health Ministry reported on Wednesday that those 20 counted deaths reflect only those who were able to reach hospitals. Quote, "We believe that dozens are dying silently as a result of starvation without reaching hospitals," said the ministry's spokesperson, Dr. Ashraf Al-Qadra. He added earlier in the day on Wednesday that, quote, "The famine is deepening and will claim thousands of citizens if the aggression is not stopped and humanitarian and medical aid does not immediately enter." The Israeli army has not stopped shelling and sniping Palestinians waiting for food trucks and humanitarian aid in northern Gaza. Last Thursday, February 29th, as Maureen Claire Murphy reported, 112 Palestinians were killed and another 760 injured after Israeli forces opened fire toward Palestinians who had gathered to receive food aid in Gaza City. Quote, "Hunger is particularly acute in the bombed-out northern half of Gaza, including Gaza City, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians remain after Israel ordered the forced displacement of people from the area months earlier," Maureen reports. Quote, "Palestinians in the north of Gaza are now starving as Israel has prevented the UN from delivering aid there for more than a month." The food aid massacre in Gaza City is a quote, "flagrant violation of international humanitarian law and fully goes against the International Court of Justice's provisional measures ordering Israel to halt genocidal actions," said Petra de Sutter, a deputy prime minister in Belgium last Thursday. The Geneva-based Euromed Human Rights Monitor said that at around 4:30 a.m. on February 29th, Israeli tanks shelled, quote, "a crowd of thousands of hungry civilians who had been waiting hours for aid trucks to arrive." Maureen Claire Murphy adds in her report that, quote, "the rights group has documented previous cases in which Israeli troops opened fire toward and killed people awaiting aid." Daniel Hagari, the chief Israeli military spokesperson, said during a press conference that the trucks were part of a convoy carrying aid from Egypt that was screened at the Kerem Shalom crossing, quote, "and then entered Gaza for distribution by private contractors." He claimed that tanks were present to, quote, "secure the humanitarian corridor for the aid convoy," and that troops, quote, "cautiously tried to disperse people," as he described as, quote, "a mob," who rushed the trucks with a few warning shots. Hagari attempted to deflect responsibility by saying that the tank commander, quote, "decided to retreat to avoid harm to the thousands of Gazans that were there," and claimed that no Israeli military strike was conducted toward the aid convoy. But as Maureen reports, the massacre was applauded by Israeli Public Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and celebrated on popular Hebrew-language Telegram channels. A majority of Jewish Israelis opposed the transfer of humanitarian aid to Gaza. In a statement published on its Telegram channel, Hamas rejected the Israeli spokesperson's claims as baseless lies intended, quote, "to cover up this heinous crime and to evade widespread international condemnation." Ashraf Al-Qadra, spokesperson for the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza, accused Israel of carrying out a premeditated massacre. Read more about last Thursday's flour bag massacre in Maureen Claire Murphy's report, "Palestinians Seeking Food Aid Killed as Israel Starves Gaza," on electronicintifada.net. Since last Thursday's massacre, Israel continued killing starving Palestinians waiting for food trucks in northern Gaza. On Monday, the Palestinian Health Ministry reported that Israeli forces committed a massacre in Gaza City, leaving dozens who were waiting for food trucks wounded and dead. At least 9 people were killed and many others were wounded in an Israeli strike on an aid distribution truck in Deir el-Balah earlier in the day. Al Jazeera's Tarek Abu Azoum, reporting from Rafah, said, quote, "It seems that the Israeli military is right now targeting people who are waiting desperately for food, for anything to survive." And yesterday, at least 4 people were killed and dozens were wounded when Israeli tanks opened fire on people gathering for aid deliveries on Rashid Street in Gaza City. Earlier in the day, the United Nations World Food Programme announced that it had attempted to resume delivering aid to northern Gaza, sending more than a dozen trucks. But Israeli occupation forces stopped the convoy at the Wadi Gaza checkpoint, separating northern and southern Gaza, for several hours before refusing entry. The World Food Programme said that, quote, "Airdrops are only a last resort to reach northern Gaza. Road routes are the only way to bring in the large quantities of food desperately needed to avert famine." For comparison, this week's airdrops only consisted of 6 tons of food, while this week's failed 14-truck convoy would have consisted of 200 tons. Ali Abu Nima and Tamara Nassar reported on Sunday that the airdrops, in which the US, Egypt, the UK, the Netherlands, the United Arab Emirates, France, and Jordan have participated, instead of forcing Israel to open the crossings and stop preventing aid trucks from unloading their cargo safely, are being marketed, quote, as benevolent assistance amounting to humanitarian aid theater that does nothing to end the systematic and intentional campaign of starvation Israel and its American and European allies, with the complicity of regional regimes, are waging against Palestinians. The effect, whether intentional or not, is to relieve Israel and its backers of pressure to lift the total siege Tel Aviv has imposed on the coastal enclave, with the clear intent of causing maximum suffering and death to as many people as possible, Ali and Tamara write. They add that, quote, "Tel Aviv knows that in practical terms, these drops will not substantially interfere with its policy of deliberately starving Palestinians to death, but it is happy with the propaganda imagery falsely suggesting that people in Gaza are receiving significant assistance." 𝐄𝐥𝐞, the bureaucratic arm of Israel's military occupation, bragged last week that, quote, "an airdrop operation successfully delivered 160 packages of food and medical supplies to residents of southern Gaza and to the Jordanian field hospital in Khan Yunis." Ali and Tamara write that, quote, "in addition to preventing all but a handful of aid trucks from entering Gaza, Tel Aviv is allowing mobs of Zionist fanatics to stage rallies blocking aid trucks carrying vital supplies from entering Gaza. These genocidal racists are encamped in tents and enjoy the protection of the Israeli army. They are even hosting outdoor dance parties." For more, read Ali Abu Nima and Tamara Nassar's latest feature, "Demeaning Airdrops Over Gaza Are Humanitarian Aid Theater," on electronicintifada.net. Meanwhile, the United Nations Women's Agency reports that, quote, "an estimated 9,000 women have been reportedly killed by Israeli forces in Gaza to date. This figure is likely an underestimate, as many more women are reported to be dead under the rubble." The UN Women's Report adds that, quote, "every day the war in Gaza continues. At the current rate, an average of 63 women will continue to be killed. An estimated 37 mothers are killed every day, leaving their families devastated and their children with diminished protection. More than 4 out of 5 women, or 84%, report that their family eats half or less of the food they used to before the war began, with mothers and adult women being those tasked with sourcing food, yet eating last, less, and least than everyone else." The Geneva-based Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor has released a new report documenting how Israeli tanks have deliberately run over dozens of Palestinian civilians alive. The human rights group documented the Israeli army's killing of a Palestinian man, quote, who was deliberately run over in Gaza City's 𝐓𝐡𝐞 neighborhood on February 29th after he was arrested. The man was subjected to harsh interrogation by members of the Israeli army, who bound his hands with plastic zip tie handcuffs before running him over with a military vehicle from the bottom to the top of his body. The victim's mutilated body and the surrounding area bear obvious signs that a military bulldozer or tank was present, the report adds. Quote, it appears that the victim was purposefully stripped of his clothes as he was seen wearing only his underwear at the time of his death. Euromed Monitor explained that this killing was just the latest in a series of violations that include the destruction of civilian property in Gaza. These acts, the group said, quote, are part of a larger Israeli effort to dehumanize every Palestinian in the Gaza Strip in order to justify and normalize the crimes being committed against them. Crushing civilians with tanks is just one of the many cruel ways the Israeli army murders Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, disregarding their humanity, suffering, and dignity. The Tel Aviv newspaper Haaretz reported this week that the Israeli army is using robotic dogs and self-driving militarized bulldozers in the Gaza Strip. Quote, in an effort to avoid harming soldiers and dogs, the IDF has been experimenting with the use of robots and remote-controlled dogs in the Gaza war. Most of the tests have been with a robot dog, which is also equipped with a drone and can replace or reinforce the 𝐓𝐿 units' dogs in certain situations. Unmanned, remote-controlled D9 bulldozers are also being used, Haaretz reports. The robot dog is made by Philadelphia-based Ghost Robotics and cost $130,000 each. Haaretz says that, quote, for the first time, the Panda, the remote-controlled D9 bulldozer, jointly developed by Israel Aerospace Industries subsidiary 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Systems, the IDF Ground Forces Technology Division, and the Defense Research and Development Directorate, has been used in the Gaza war. The D9 is remotely operated by a screen and a joystick to carry out missions to expose ground and demolish buildings without jeopardizing soldiers, end quote. And finally, Tamara Nassar reports that, quote, Israel is escalating its provocations against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank in the wake of the holy month of Ramadan, despite claims that it is attempting to prevent further escalation. Earlier this week, Israeli occupation forces conducted one of the largest military raids in Ramallah in years, Tamara reported. Quote, Palestinian children in the occupied West Bank bear the brunt for such military raids, where the unlawful killing of Palestinian children is the norm, according to Defense for Children International Palestine, which collects field reports on Israel's killing of children. Israeli troops and settlers have killed 27 Palestinian children in the occupied West Bank since the beginning of the year. This includes 2 teenage U.S. citizens. This past week, Tamara reports, Israeli forces killed 3 Palestinian children in the West Bank, including Mohammed Khaled Zaid, 13 years old, who was shot 3 times in his back and thigh while standing near a United Nations-run school by the entrance to the Jalazun refugee camp. When his friend, who was also injured, went to seek help, soldiers took Mohammed's body. An hour later, quote, they returned his body to the sidewalk near the entrance of the camp, reported Defense for Children International Palestine. Tamara also reports that, quote, on Wednesday, Israeli authorities approved tenders for thousands of homes in settlements across the occupied West Bank. Quote, this is the first time since June that the development of housing units in the West Bank have been advanced, Tel Aviv Daily Haaretz said. The head of the Israeli military's Central Command has also granted authorization for an Israeli outpost, illegal even under Israeli law, in the occupied West Bank to be transformed into a large settlement. If the plan is carried out, the outpost known as Mitzpeh Yehuda will be established as an official city settlement named Mishmar Yehuda. This would be an expansion of Israel's mega settlement of Ma'ale Adumim, adding more than 650 acres of stolen Palestinian land. For much more on the escalating situation in the occupied West Bank, read Tamara Nassar's latest report, Will Ramadan Tip the West Bank into Eruption, on electronicintifada.net. And you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman. Coming up, we'll have journalist Bryce Greene on to talk about the way the corporate media continues to peddle Israel's lies about October 7th. And we'll get a full update from Jon Elmer on the latest military developments from the resistance in Gaza. But first, we're pleased to be joined by Dr. Arham Ali, pediatric critical care specialist at Loma Linda University Children's Hospital in Southern California. He just spent time in Gaza working at the Emirati Maternity Hospital in Rafah. Arham, thank you so much for being with us on the Electronic Intifada live stream.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and privilege to be here and to communicate what I was able to do, what I was able to see, and to communicate the voices heard across the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell us a little. Yeah, thank you. Tell us a little bit about your specialty and the work you did in Gaza.
Sure, absolutely. By training, I'm a pediatric critical care intensivist. So I work in the pediatric ICU. I've been a physician for over 10 years as well, and I'm no stranger to trauma, to abuse, to burn injuries. This is something that I do day in and day out. I speak to families, I speak to siblings, I speak to patients regarding their severe injuries, regarding their risk of death, and I speak to family members after the patients pass away as well, unfortunately. Specifically, when I was in Gaza, I was able to work in the Emirati hospital, as you mentioned, and my specific role was to work in the neonatal ICU. So this is also an intensive care unit, but specifically restricted to premature children, to newborn babies, and to children primarily under 12 months of age as well.
I mean, over the last 5 months, we've been reporting on, documenting the absolutely unspeakable situation, especially for children, especially for premature infants in the NICU and children in the PICU, the pediatric intensive care units across Gaza. Give us a sense of what you saw and what was needed for these very, very small and vulnerable children.
Thank you. Absolutely. I'll start off by stating that despite my years of training, my vocabulary does not encompass enough words to describe the atrocities and the devastation that's happening in Gaza right now for these young, innocent children, specifically for the newborn population. The hospital that I was working in the neonatal ICU, is now the largest functioning neonatal ICU in all of Gaza. And it's a 12-bed ICU, but quite often we will have up to 36, 40 patients inside of those 12 beds. So these patients are sharing incubators. They're in shared spaces, which you can imagine is devastating for infection control and for sepsis, and infection continues to spread. Many of the patients that I saw are patients that were either born just a little too early, prematurely, due to maternal stress, due to maternal malnutrition, due to maternal trauma, due to maternal dehydration. These children were born, anywhere in the 20 weeks to 38 weeks range, slightly premature. And many of them could have been treated and would have, beautiful lives. And we would see them into adulthood with some assistance, and perhaps they would be on the next show, and they would be our leaders for Palestine. But unfortunately, given the severe lack of healthcare infrastructure, due to the severe lack of essential medical supplies and equipment, these children that have survivable injuries, unfortunately now are unable to survive. Medications as simple as caffeine. It's a medication that's given either intravenously or orally, and it's given to premature children just to provide it as a stimulant to help them breathe. And this is a very common medication that's available here. It's very cheap, in the West, and widely available. But unfortunately, due to the shortage and due to the blockade of supplies entering into Gaza, we saw countless patients, unfortunately, pass away from simple apnea or lack of stimulation to breathe. Many of these cases are extremely devastating because, there was one specific instance in which I remember speaking to a mother, and she said that after 14 years, including IVF treatment, she finally had a child. And the child, had apnea prematurity, which the treatment is caffeine. The child was initially receiving it, but then unfortunately we ran out. And unfortunately, this beautiful child ended up passing away. And it was absolutely devastating for the entire healthcare staff, for the family as well.
Dr. Arham, what we're seeing and what we're reading in terms of children starving to death. On Wednesday, the health ministry in Gaza said that 20 people have starved to death, including, according to the chief doctor at the 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐨𝐢 hospital, a baby that was 1 day old. Is it possible for a newborn baby to starve to death? What does it take for that to happen in terms of the health of the mother and the conditions that are around? Help us understand that.
Absolutely, Ali. Thank you for bringing that up. And I think you hit the nail in the coffin here in terms of focusing on maternal health. So yes, it is possible for a 1 day child, to starve or to die from dehydration and malnutrition, but it stems from mom's nutrition. What was the maternal nutrition leading up or during the pregnancy? What was mother's nutrition peri-delivery? What were the circumstances of the delivery? Was there any bleeding that happened? Did the child require any blood transfusions, which are extremely limited? Was the child dehydrated? What kind of milk was the child able to have access to? Many of these mothers, unfortunately, given the stress, are unable to breastfeed their children, whether it's due to their own malnutrition and lack of nutrition, or whether it's due to the stress of the scenario, or many, as you know, many of these children are being born after their mothers have died, from some source of trauma. Even preterm formula was a scarcity. We ran out of it, and we were giving preterm children regular infant, a neonatal formula, which does not have the appropriate nutrition and minerals and essential components for nutrition. And lack of water is also a severe consequence of this aggression right now as well. Earlier in the aggression, there was a time in which the intensivists had access to formula, but unfortunately no clean water. And they were, to make the formula, they were mixing the formula with seawater. And the amount of salt composition, you're essentially poisoning your patient. And, we did not go to medical school. We did not do our years of training to poison our patients and to actively kill them. But these were the dire circumstances. And many children, newborn babies, young infants are dying simply because of malnutrition and lack of clean food and milk.
And for the infants who do somehow survive, these circumstances, what does chronic malnutrition and this engineered starvation that Israel is imposing on Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, what does it do to the body, to a growing and developing body, especially at such a young age? How does what Israel is doing now impact a child's entire life?
Yeah. So we know through lots of research and scientific analysis that children with restricted access to food, or those that are in food deserts, specifically here in the US, have chronic growth abnormalities. They have delayed neurocognition. They're unable to meet their maximum potential, both in terms of growth and in terms of neurocognition as well. They're at higher risk for infection. They are overall at a higher risk of morbidity and mortality. And food desert is a term that we use here in the United States and it's one that refers to a lack of access to food or a lack of access to healthy food. When we talk about Gaza in specific, I think it's a little bit more severe, to say, food desert is not the appropriate term. This is inflicted starvation, targeted starvation for young innocent children. These children are exposed to adverse childhood events. They will have long-term consequences if they're able to live into childhood, into toddlers, and eventually into teenagers and into adults. The brain, the formation of the brain is very, very highly dependent on lipids and proteins, and kind of the wiring connections these are essential nutrients that are required. And if these children are unable to receive it, they will not be able to, form healthy, good, beautiful brains, unfortunately.
Dr. Arham, talk about, you're at the Emirati hospital, which is in Rafah. As we know, Rafah is the southernmost city in Gaza. It's where more than 1 million people are currently seeking safety and shelter, ordered to go there by Israel from other parts of Gaza. And Rafah has, of course, not been spared from aerial bombardment and attacks. But from what we hear, it is the least affected in comparison to the devastation in the north and some of the middle parts of Gaza. And Israel is threatening a full-scale attack on Rafah. Talk about the conditions at the hospital. What are you seeing? What would someone see walking into that hospital? And talk about the availability of supplies. You talked about basic medications running out. Are any supplies coming in? Is nothing coming in, or is it a trickle, or is it coming sporadically? Help us understand the reality on the ground.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'll go ahead and start off describing the environment surrounding the hospital as you're entering in. There are hundreds and thousands of tents surrounding the hospital. As traditionally speaking, hospitals are seen as a safe haven and a safe area for people to reside in. Additionally, because there's so much trauma that's going on, if you are injured, it's in your best interest to be close to a hospital so that you can seek healthcare assistance as quickly as possible. So there's hundreds of tents. There are children roaming the streets. There are adults roaming the streets. Unfortunately, because school is not in session right now, these children are not learning. They're trying their best to keep themselves occupied. Same with the parents as well. There's a lot of despair. There's, when you look into, the common man or woman's eyes, you see a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. They see you as a fresh outsider face, and they see hope. But ultimately, that hope is quite limited. What we're doing is essentially just putting a Band-Aid on a deep wound that is going to scar, and a Band-Aid is not enough. As you enter into the hospital, you're surrounded by patients and their family members. As you're walking in through the gates as well, you can see lines in the outpatient department outside of the pharmacies for people trying to seek some form of pharmacological intervention. The hallways are lined with both patients and also with people just residing, again, trying to seek shelter. The conditions are extremely unhygienic, unfortunately, given the circumstances, the lack of clean water, the lack of cleaning supplies. And as you make your way on up into the neonatal ICU, you can actually see a trail of individuals holding buckets because the hospital, traditionally speaking, will usually have some form of clean water available. So it's a very chaotic environment. It's one in which is full of desperation and unrelenting sadness. In terms of supplies entering into the hospitals, entering into Rafah, I will say it's a very, very slow trickle, extremely. And given the needs, the population of Rafah prior to this aggression was around 200,000, if I'm quoting correctly, and now it's over 1 million. So the needs are significantly higher, yet the supply is significantly less. So this is a recipe for disaster. It's a targeted recipe for disaster, unfortunately, and we're seeing it full on.
We just have a couple minutes left, Dr. Arham, but I wanted to ask you, when you came back to the U.S. and to Southern California, where you live and work and teach, how do you process what you've seen, and how does it inform your work back home?
As I mentioned earlier, I'm no stranger to death, and unfortunately, it's not uncommon while I'm working in my ICU here in the U.S. that we will pronounce a patient dead, and we have to move on to the next patient as quickly as possible, because that's what the patients need, and that's what the families need as well. They need our 100% attention. The situation here coming back to the U.S. Is different. Those beautiful children, I see their faces at night. I can hear their voices. I can see their mothers if I close my eyes and think about them. So it certainly is quite challenging to be able to go back to the status quo or the norm. I'm incredibly grateful for the supplies and equipment and the personnel and the support that are available here in the U.S. And I can't help but to wonder and to think that if we were able to provide a little bit more aid, if more aid was allowed into Palestine, how different the situation would be for these indigenous civilians.
Well, we're going to leave it right there. Dr. Arham Ali, you're a pediatric critical care specialist at the Loma Linda University Children's Hospital in Southern California. Thank you so much for being with us and for going to Gaza and working alongside the heroic physicians and staff at the Emirati Maternity Hospital. And please keep us posted on your work.
And thank you for speaking about your experience, because I really hope that, many of our colleagues who've come on the live stream have talked about, for example, the silence of the American Medical Association about the situation in Gaza. So I hope that many of your medical colleagues will hear what you have to say and what you've seen, and that bearing witness will be just as important as the work you did trying to help and heal people in Gaza.
Thank you very much. If I could just send a quick message to my colleagues here stateside, and that's specifically for the pediatricians across the U.S. Just as a reminder, we are mandated reporters, and that means that we have to report all suspected and known instances of trauma or abuse to children, whether it be patients that we're taking care of in front of us or across the globe. So this is just a gentle reminder that we need to stand up for these children against their abusers and continue to provide care with empathy and compassion.
That's beautifully said and so important. And I hope that your colleagues understand their mandate. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Arham.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman. I'm going to throw it to Ali Abunimah and Asa Winstanley to introduce our next guest, Bryce Greene.
Thanks, Nora. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Asa Winstanley. I'm here with Ali Abunimah, and you are watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. Now, we are delighted to be joined by Bryce Greene. Bryce is an organizer, writer, and contributor to the media watchdog Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, or FAIR. He's contributed to numerous independent media outlets, including the Electronic Intifada. Welcome, Bryce.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Hi, Bryce. It's nice we've communicated in every way except face-to-face like this. So it's nice to finally do that.
Absolutely. It's good to see you both.
Yeah,
Face-to-face.
thanks for coming on. And Bryce, your most recent analysis for Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, FAIR, is titled Shielding U.S. Public from Israeli Reports of Friendly Fire on October 7th. And you write that since October, the Israeli press has uncovered damning evidence showing that an untold number of the Israeli victims during the October 7th Hamas attack were in fact killed by the Israeli army. And you say that the Israeli army's responsibility for Israeli deaths has been a repeated topic of discussion in the Israeli press, accompanied by demands for investigations. But the most US readers have gotten from their own press about the issue is a dismissive piece from the Washington Post about so-called October 7th truthers. Of course, you're referring there to the article we've talked about previously on this live stream, the hit piece on the Electronic Intifada, the Gray Zone, and other independent outlets who've done this kind of reporting. We've obviously reported extensively on this topic at the Electronic Intifada, as you kindly acknowledge, but talk to us more about what you are seeing and not seeing in the Western media in terms of this question of friendly fire and perhaps other elements of what's happening in Gaza.
Absolutely. Most Americans have this image of their press as, obstinate and a challenging power and really trying to muckrake up real stories to help the American people understand the world better. But that doesn't square with the reality of actual media performance. As you say, in the Israeli press, things that challenge the official narrative of October 7th have been routinely reported and widely discussed. But in America, you very rarely see any discussion of this. And as you said, the most discussions you see of this are either glossing over it as not an issue or actively attacking the people who report on this sort of thing. Now, this is a strange phenomenon because in Israel, the press there is actually under military censorship. So one might expect that the press there would serve a more overt propaganda role than they do here in the United States, but that's not the case. Even without military censorship, American editors and journalists, they understand the areas that they're not supposed to go into. They understand the topics that they're not supposed to talk about, and they understand that they can easily get ahead if they attack the people who do talk about these sorts of things. And so the media in the United States has really served to engineer consent for Israel's brutal genocidal attack on Gaza. These reports about the friendly fire on October 7th, they're important because they challenge the narrative that all of these civilians that were killed on October 7th were killed by Hamas, and that the attack on October 7th was designed to kill as many civilians as possible. Reports from Hamas and reports from about these friendly fire incidents, well, they seem to at least challenge that narrative. But American journalists, even if they truly believe in the narrative that October 7th was an unequivocal terrorist attack, well, they don't seem to want to defend it by comparing their versions and other official versions with what's been coming out in the Israeli press. The instinct has been to suppress it and to attack those who do report on it. And so this goes along with all these other aspects of American media performance. It's become sort of a dark joke on the internet about every time these Western media outlets report on the death of a Palestinian, they'll use the passive voice and they'll abstract away any responsibility that Israel obviously has for these deaths. It'll be something like a Palestinian child struck by bullet during clashes or something like that. Whereas if they report on an Israeli death, it'll be, Hamas killed this Israeli. And they know what they're doing. These people go to journalism school. They know what the effect might be on the American public, and they choose to report this way anyway. And it's hard to believe that this isn't intentional and that they're not actively embracing their role as cheerleaders for Israeli apartheid and genocide.
Yeah. One of the things that's been admitted or at least discussed in Israel is the use of the Hannibal Directive on October 7th. Now, that's, I mean, as our viewers and listeners will most likely know because of our ongoing coverage of this, the Hannibal Directive is the Israeli military doctrine that allows their military forces to use any level of force necessary to prevent Israelis from being taken captive, even if that means killing those Israelis in the process. And that's in order to prevent an enemy from gaining bargaining chips that can be used to force Israel to release prisoners it may be holding. Bryce, have you seen US media outlets, and particularly the New York Times, addressing the question of the Hannibal Doctrine?
I've yet to see the New York Times describe the Hannibal Doctrine in as many words. There have been scattered reports from the Times about how generals have ordered their troops to fire on areas where they know that Israeli civilians are being held. But this has been, again, glossed over. It's not been described as anything worth a headline. If it is discussed, it's discussed in several paragraphs down, where editors and journalists know that people typically don't read to. And it's not emphasized, and it's not opined on or remarked upon in any serious way. And so, again, this seems to be a deliberate campaign of suppressing the actual facts of the day of October 7th in favor of the official Israeli narrative.
Well, I mean, it's as you've pointed out, the U.S. media is to borrow a phrase, being more Catholic than the Pope, because, as we've pointed out, these matters are discussed in the Israeli press. I mean, we shouldn't give the Israeli media too much credit. The vast majority of it is war propaganda and genocidal war propaganda, but nonetheless, we do see questions being raised in Israeli media that are just absent in the US, and the same is true in Canada, the UK, and much of Europe, the so-called West. My question for you is, and you've talked about how journalists in the US are doing it knowingly, and they seem to know what the limits are of what they're allowed to say. But my question is, I guess I have two questions. Who's the target of this propagandistic coverage? And is it working from the perspective of those doing it? I mean, how do you see the state of public opinion and the reaction to this coverage? I know that's a broad question, but what do you think the effect of it is?
Well, that's an important one. The idea that these articles, these propagandistic reports, are going to change the minds of people like you or me who have done the reading is just laughable. Anyone who has above a 10th grade reading level is able to read through these reports, check the facts against what the sources say, and weigh the evidence in a serious manner. But these articles aren't meant for those people. These articles are meant for the people who are either completely fanatics or just completely incurious about the actual facts of the matter. It's very easy for someone to see a headline attacking October 7th truthers and then see that as justification for them never to actually read the articles that challenge the official narrative, to never actually investigate for themselves what these reports say, what this UN report says, what all these civil commissions have been saying. The people who write these reports and write these articles, they understand that the majority of the public does not read these sorts of things. They understand that it's easy to poison or inoculate the public against these reports. And so they're not for serious people doing investigations. They're not for people who want to actually debate the facts in a serious manner. They're just meant to nudge people away from the truth and therefore support the Israeli line and the campaign that they're committing. It doesn't seem to be any doubt about that.
Yeah, I mean,
Asa, why don't we talk about Asa? Why don't you? I'd like to hear what Bryce thinks about the issue we've just written about and just published moments before this live stream. Why don't you talk, and this is also a chance to update the audience on a story, a scandal we've been covering. So Asa, why don't you let's go into that.
Yeah, so closely related to the Israeli atrocity propaganda and the issue of the Israeli death toll, and as well as the issue of friendly fire and the Hannibal doctrine that you address in your piece, is the issue of Israel's debunked propaganda narrative that there was a campaign of mass rape carried out by Palestinians during the 7th of October military assault. And we've closely followed this story here on the live stream, and Ali has repeatedly debunked this narrative. And now Ali and I have written this new story with the latest on the issue, and you can see it on the screen here. UN report launders Israel's fraudulent mass rape propaganda. And it's about the new UN report by Pramila Patten, and how it is being touted in the mainstream media as shoring up Israel's propaganda narrative on this issue. I read the report in detail, and it contains no new evidence. And actually, technically, it contains no evidence at all, because it makes the distinction that it presents information instead, that quote unquote they received information. And the details in it are actually the recycling of prior debunked claims. Now, strikingly as well, what I found was that Pramila Patten, the UN official who led the report team, according to a contemporary Israeli press report from February, repeatedly expressed solidarity with Israel during her week-long visit to the settlements near Gaza in January. So, for our readers and listeners, if you go to electronicintifada.net and read the article, you can see all the details there. It's on the front page of the site at the moment. But maybe just a question for you, Bryce. Have you seen how the corporate media has reported on this issue, and what is their attitude towards it?
Well, I've been following these stories of mass rape from the mainstream media for quite a while. I think your listeners and viewers might remember the fact that a big push for these stories came as part of Israel's justification for continuing the attack after the end of the first ceasefire, after the end of the first hostage deal. As that deal ended, Israel started ramping up its attacks again. And at the same time, you started seeing in the press these stories of mass rape, which are very obviously, yeah. And much like the people talk about the timing of the bombing of Rafah and the Super Bowl, and the only time the Israelis rescued a hostage was timed right after a commercial. The same way, I mean, this push on these stories was timed to be with the resumption of hostilities. And so these stories are largely based on about 4 or 5 different accounts. And each of these has various degrees of credibility. But the UN report, what they found, interestingly enough, was that they didn't even have access to video evidence that demonstrated the claims that they were making. They didn't have access to firsthand witnesses who were demonstrating the claims they were making. And if you actually read the report and you go to the findings sections, there's about 4 pages of findings. There's not a single footnote in that section that could link one of the claims that's made to a source, to an interview or a media report or a document or whatever. So the reader who's reading this report is left to simply take Pramila at her word. And another interesting fact about Pramila is that she was also one of the people who promoted the idea that Russians were using Viagra as a weapon of war during their invasion of Ukraine.
That same claim was also recycled from Hillary Clinton's State Department when they made that same false claim with respect to Libya in 2011 in order to gin up support for the Obama administration's regime change war in Libya. And then subsequently, US intelligence officials and UN investigators said, we found no evidence for this. So it's, we're told constantly, it's become this kind of refrain that sexual violence is endemic to war. Where there's war, there's sexual and violence, and that's something we don't want to make light of. But by the same token, where there is war propaganda and atrocity propaganda, and that pattern keeps repeating. And with respect to this UN report, it's incredible to me, and this is something we also talk about in the article that we just published just before the live stream came on, that repeatedly in the report, Pramila Patten says that she had no investigative mandate, that most of the information she received came from so-called Israeli national institutions. When she toured the Israeli settlements in southern Israel near the Gaza boundary, she was accompanied, and this is in photos that were published by the Israelis, she was accompanied by Yossi Landau, the man from the Jewish extremist group Zaka that repeatedly fabricated atrocity propaganda about murdered babies and children, and about a fetus being cut out of its mother's stomach. Debunked stories that we have talked about on the live stream before. And she also says in the report that the UN team did what they call a medico-legal assessment, meaning sort of a looking for medical evidence in countless photos and videos of rape, and found none. That's stated in the report. They saw no video showing a sexual assault taking place. This is all in the report. And yet, the media spin on this report. And very importantly, as Asa mentioned, the UN report states that several of the most widely cited incidents of claimed sexual assault are unfounded, including one story that has been repeated ad nauseum in practically every press report, including and especially the New York Times report, the infamous New York Times report led by Jeffrey Gettleman back in December. And this is the claim that 2 teenage girls were found raped and murdered in kibbutz Be'eri. And the UN report says this is unfounded. And also, The Intercept, doing its own reporting in the last couple of days, also said categorically that this report is unfounded, and that officials in kibbutz Be'eri have categorically denied this and other allegations of sexual assault. And yet, the media are spinning this UN report as if it bolsters and confirms Israel's claims. How is that possible? Did they not read the same report we read?
Well, there's no good reason to expect them to have actually read the report. I mean, these reports aren't designed to be read and critically examined. They're designed to have a conclusion that can be quoted in a media report that will advance the interest of the Israeli state. If you actually look at the report, a lot of it is them going through and talking about how they couldn't find any evidence. A lot of that is debunking some of the more lurid claims that were made by media reports. A lot of it is talking about how or justifying the reasons why they haven't yet found any victims for this. But the report's conclusions were written, it seems, in a completely separate vacuum than the actual body of the report. If the report's conclusions were to reflect the actual evidence that they found, it would have looked a lot differently. Journalists, they don't need to read the report. All they need to know is that there's a report from someone that their editor believes is credible, and that they can just quote word from word from that report, regardless of whether or not it makes sense or it's coherent or if it adds up. And so that's really how this pipeline works. You have media reports based on unverified sources. And then though you have an organization that makes a report based on these media sources saying that, well, now it's in a report, so now it's true. And then you have more media outlets reporting on that report. It's a very horrific circle that they have there.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the points that the Twitter user 𝐓𝐡𝐞 has made, who, along with us independent journalists, EI and the Grey Zone and Mondoweiss, 𝐓𝐡𝐞. I mean, we've talked about 𝐓𝐡𝐞 before. Twitter user with a squirrel avatar. We don't know who they are, but they are a very established Twitter user, a very popular Twitter user, who has actually unearthed some new findings that no one else has come up with before. And 𝐓𝐡𝐞 has made this same point that you're making, that it's kind of self-repeating narrative. It's being fed.
Hold on, Asa. Hold on, because I know the point you want to make, but I actually want to show, because it's quite funny, this. Tamara, let's put up the headline that appears in Haaretz today. Can we do that? Yeah, so this is a story that was published in Haaretz, which is considered the respectable newspaper of record in Israel. The unhinged denialist frenzy around Hamas's sexual violence on October. And so this piece is attacking those of us who have questioned this narrative and pointed out the complete lack of evidence for it. Let's focus in on that one paragraph, Tamara. And I'll just read this for those who are listening. And this is from Haaretz. Relying mostly on one another as sources, why bother with exhaustively documented information from people on the ground when you can conjure up your dogma from thousands of miles away? Groups such as the Intercept, Mondoweiss, Electronic Intifada, and something called Yes, in an unhinged article written by an expert on bacon and junk food, try their best to conjure a conspiratorial swirl of doubts and delegitimization. Remember, just asking questions and doing my own research. So what this Haaretz writer is claiming is that the Intercept, Mondoweiss, the Electronic Intifada, and others who have debunked the mass rapes claim, really, we don't have anything to back that up. We're all just citing each other and going around in a circle and ignoring documented information from people on the ground. What do you make of that, Bryce? Is that a fair description of reality?
Well, I actually read this article this morning, and I did a semi-detailed Twitter thread talking about it. I went through and looked at what they actually had to criticize about the article or about the outlets that they're attacking here. And much like the Washington Post article attacking truthers, this article doesn't actually link to any of these outlets or anything they have to say. They don't address a single specific claim that any of these outlets make. All they do is they again seem to want to dissuade people from reading these outlets and dissuade people from even looking at what these outlets have to say. And the idea that, they're just all citing each other, that's how journalism operates. Different people find different information and they put it together in a coherent narrative. But B, it's also hypocritical, because what they're doing is they're simply citing these reports on sexual violence that, again, just cite media reports without any evidence. And so it's just completely ridiculous. You can look at this article, you try to find something that they disagree with about from Mondoweiss, from Grey Zone, from Yes, which featured an excellent article about these topics. These are detailed articles with dozens of citations, with several claims that can be fact-checked. You can either say that this is true or this is false. But what they do is they say, well, all these outlets are just lunatic, crazy. They might as well have called them truthers or Holocaust denial, because the goal is the same. They want readers and the general public to hear these outlets' names, associate them with a negative sentiment, and then avoid them. And that's what this article is designed to do.
And
Yeah,
then let's just show. Sorry, Asa. I was going to show the Bret Stephens article. Should we just do that quick?
Yeah.
Because it's in the same in the same realm. And this is an article that appeared in the New York Times by their columnist Bret Stephens, who is well known as an extreme right-wing supporter of Israel and a New York Times columnist. And as you can see, it's called The New Rape Denialism. And can we just show the first couple of paragraphs of that piece? Because what he writes is extraordinary. In the first two paragraphs, I'll just read the second paragraph. He says, Hamas denies that its men sexually assaulted Israelis, calling the charges lies and slanders against the Palestinians and their resistance, and Hamas's fellow travelers and useful idiots in the West. That presumably means journalists who actually do journalism. Most of them self-described progressives. I guess that's the confirmation he's talking about us. Parrot that denialism in the face of powerful and deeply investigated evidence of widespread rapes, documented most recently in a United Nations report released on Monday. Okay, so what does he link to as the examples of powerful and deeply investigated evidence? If we actually click on the links, let's take a look. Yeah, go ahead and click on those links, Tamara. Yeah, that one. You can see he's linking to the debunked and fraudulent New York Times article that we've talked about already so many times, and to the UN report that we've just discussed. So again, they're going full throttle in attacking the journalists and the messengers and trying to dissuade people from actually reading any of the journalism.
Yeah, it's like this. It's this sort of self-repeating pattern, right? It's been laundered from the Israeli government into the New York Times and now into the UN system, because, you know, unlike our articles, the difference between our articles and the New York Times article and even this UN report is that we cite all our evidence. We're very, very specific. You know, we always provide sources for to back up what we're saying, whereas even this UN report is making assertions and specifically saying that they don't have evidence, that this is not evidence, it is information received, and they won't even confirm who the information is received from, although it's very clear that the vast majority of it, at least, is coming from the Israeli government or Israeli national institutions, as they claim, as they put it in the report.
No, it's a very strange thing. Again, this article, this New York Times article, was also cited in that 𝐓𝐻𝐿T's piece. It was also held up as an example of serious investigative reporting. And interestingly enough, they say that the only gripe that people who criticize the New York Times article have is a distinction between systematic mass rape and incidental instances of sexual violence. But I mean, if you even look at what The Intercept reported about the Daily, the New York Times' own fact checkers not being able to verify the claims in this article, I mean, that should shut that down immediately. But who knows if this 𝐓𝐻𝐿T's writer read the article or read anything about the article or was just given a series of links and just told to attack these guys. But the idea that all these reports will just link to each other, and any example of a false claim can just be hand waved away because of the other reports that are of course, you know, serious and well researched. But if you look at each of these individual reports, they really fall apart upon closer scrutiny. And anyone trying to make claims should be held to the standard of evidence. And extreme claims should be held to the level of extreme evidence. Here, there are extreme claims being made and very, very minuscule evidence being presented. And I think that it should give anyone pause. It's not what the 𝐓𝐿T's calls a conspiratorial frenzy. That's the term that they use. It's just people reading, again, at a 10th grade level. If you're able to do that, then you can easily figure out what the facts are.
Yeah, I'm going to assert that the fact that we're seeing this article, the article in Haaretz attacking us by name, along with other independent outlets, and the Bret Stephens piece clearly referring to us, although he doesn't mention our outlets by name, as a sign of panic and as a sign of recognition of the failure of this narrative. Again, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and even Haaretz, they don't go after people like us unless we are really starting to damage their ability to push this propaganda off without challenge.
And just to remind our listeners and viewers that the central problem that Bret Stephens and Haaretz are ignoring about this New York Times article, I mean, amongst many, is that the very fact that the woman at the center of that article, Gal Abdouche, her family, you could see in that photo there, the head of that article, have said that the New York Times reporters misled them, that Anat Schwartz, the main reporter on the ground, misled them as to the nature of this article, and that they are insistent that their daughter was not raped before she was killed, that Gal Abdouche was not raped before she was killed, despite the fact that is the central claim in this article, making these insinuations that she was raped by Hamas. That her family is saying that did not happen, and now the other two women pinpointed in this story,
the two teenage girls who allegedly were raped and murdered, and The Intercept has confirmed. And this was first reported by Mondoweiss back at the beginning of December, that the story of the two teenage girls raped and murdered in Be'eri, and it was a claim that was made by an Israeli army medic, remember. So this is somebody who is involved in the part of the military that's engaging in genocide. Back in December, Mondoweiss showed how this story couldn't have happened, that there were no two victims that fit that description in Be'eri, in kibbutz Be'eri. And now, as The Intercept has reported, the authorities in kibbutz Be'eri have confirmed that this did not happen. So it's all falling apart. And also, I mean, we could go on about this, but I want to ask Bryce about some of the other issues he's involved in. But I'll just say that with Anat Schwartz, one of the New York Times journalists, the novice journalist who was put on this particular story, and I don't think we had a chance to talk about this on the live stream because of the timing. I think it came out the same day that we did last week's live stream, that as The Intercept reported, she spoke at length in Hebrew to a podcast in Israel about the reporting of this story. And she revealed in that they called up every single emergency room or specialized facility in Israel that's charged with caring for victims of sexual assault, and they called the rape crisis line in southern Israel. They checked with all these institutions, and every single one of them told them, we did not have a single report of sexual assault or rape on October 7th. Not one. That should have alerted the editors at the New York Times that the story here was not one of mass sexual violence, of mass sexual violence, but one of massive fraud. And they should have then said, wait a minute, let's stop and let's find out what's going on. Instead, what they did is, okay, you found no victims, you searched every possible place in Israel where there could be victims, and you didn't find any, then you got to manufacture some victims. And that's exactly what the New York Times ended up doing.
Yeah, can I just add a word about the motive of this as well, Ali, before you sort of transition to the other issues? it's very striking. Israel's UN ambassador Gilad Erdan is saying this week he's making direct threats against the UN, and what he said in a statement this week is, quote, "The meaning of a ceasefire is to lengthen the suffering of the hostages. Any call for a ceasefire is blatant support for Hamas to continue their sexual violence." So, in other words, Israel is trying to smear those of us calling for an end to its genocide in Gaza as rape apologists. So that is the reason why this campaign is being, manufactured. Why this fabricated claim has gone out, and we've seen there, there was a report about this in the Grey Zone, the latest report in the Grey Zone about this. The Israel lobby in Washington D.C. is also pushing this line about to emphasize that rape by Hamas took place in order to push back against the growing calls around the world for an end for a ceasefire in Gaza and an end to the genocide. So that's what this is all about at the end of the day.
Yeah, but before we move on, I'd love to hear Bryce's reaction to this particular story that they focus tested what messaging would work best in terms of this. Bryce, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, this guy who's in charge of this focus testing, according to this Grey Zone article, is a man named Frank Luntz, who is a longtime Republican pollster who's found good ways to sell horrible policy to the American public, finding which phrases or which words elicit the largest emotional reaction. And he was used to help push through Bush administration policies, like the invasion of Iraq. And he was, he's one of these longtime blob goons who's just doing the bidding of evil. And now he seems to be back at it by figuring out the best way to convince people in America that they need to support Israel. You see all these terms that they're using, holding Hamas accountable. This is our 9/11. It's a war for humanity. I mean, these phrases don't come out of nowhere. The public relations industry for the last 100 years has been one of the most sophisticated industries in public opinion and public manipulation. You don't become $1 billion industry by not doing anything useful, or at least useful to someone. And they find the ability to conduct these focus tests and target the messaging for maximum potency to be extremely useful. This campaign of genocide is bolstered by this lab-tested, focus-tested propaganda. And there's another graphic on this in this article that shows the impact of certain phrases that describe what's going on or what happened in Israel. And as you see, raped civilians and massacred civilians had the most reaction from the public. And so I'm sure after these focus tests were conducted, the Israeli propaganda strategy adjusted accordingly. I mean, why wouldn't it? That's their job. So again, this just shows the degree to which all of us, especially in America, are subjected to constant propaganda that is designed, tailor-made to get Americans to support this genocide. And again, like I said earlier, it's not about people who do the reading, people who follow the news every day. It's not about people like you or me who try and evaluate the facts on their merits. This is for the general public. This is for people who are too busy to sit down and read 14 Electronic Intifada articles a day to figure out what's really going on. If you're an average person and someone tells you that there are raped civilians and we have to go stop them, well, then your natural reaction is going to be, well, obviously I support this. And that's how evil manifests itself, and that's how it persists.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you. And I know that we're going to come back to this topic. It's not going to go away because the propaganda is necessary to Israel and the genocide. So we're going to have to keep debunking it and pushing back on it. But while we still have you, Bryce, I want to talk about some of the other issues that you've written about and have been involved in addition to your contributions for fairness and accuracy in reporting. You are a doctoral student and an organizer at Indiana University in Bloomington. And in January, you wrote about the situation at Indiana University for us at the Electronic Intifada, where your friend and mentor, Professor 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 was suspended. He is a tenured professor in political science. And you wrote, his removal is not only an attack on free speech and academic freedom, but it is designed to suppress pro-Palestine speech at a time when Palestinians are suffering one of the most devastating attacks in their history. And it's more important than ever for Americans to speak out against injustice in Palestine. And Professor 𝐓𝐡𝐞 was suspended in December over supposed mistakes on a form he filled out to reserve a room for a speaking event featuring the author 𝐓𝐿 𝐄𝐥𝐿. You wrote also that there is good reason to suspect that 𝐓𝐡𝐞's targeting has less to do with minor bureaucratic formalities and more to do with his role in assisting movements for justice on campus. Can you bring us up to date regarding this situation and what the reaction has been at Indiana University?
Well, this, as you said, it was a very troubling situation to have, again, an important professor, an important member of our community being barred from his activism over what appears to be political reasons. I don't think anyone seriously believes that the university was very concerned about, again, these minor bureaucratic errors, allegedly. What they're doing is they're creating an environment where people are afraid to speak out, where people know that if they step out of line, they could get the eye of the university on their backs. Now, they might not have any sanction levied against them, but dealing with that is difficult, and people don't want to do that. So creating this chilling effect has been their goal. But there has been a lot of pushback from the community, from the faculty, from other students at the university. It's pretty clear what's going on, and people are trying to fight against it. Even professors who aren't diehard supporters of anti-imperialist movements are very concerned that one of their colleagues can be summarily dismissed for what appear to be politically motives. They're very concerned, and so they're organizing about it. And it's very heartening to see the petitions for 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and the petitions for Samia Halabi, who was removed from the university's upcoming art exhibits for similar political reasons. It's heartening to see that those actions are galvanizing the public, or the university community, into serious action. Now, one thing we've learned since 𝐓𝐡𝐞's dismissal was that after about 2 to 3 weeks after the 𝐓𝐞 𝐄𝐿 event, the university entered into a partnership with the Anti-Defamation League and other pro-Israel organizations to help combat anti-Semitism on campus, so to speak. And this seems to be in response to a letter from our congressman, Jim Banks, who sent a letter to the university demanding that they investigate anti-Semitism, demanding that they take some steps to make the environment safer for pro-Israel views. And so this happened in late November, and 𝐓𝐡𝐞's dismissal came in December. Now, there's no direct evidence tying these two together, but given the issues at play and given the pressure campaign that the university was embarking upon, it's difficult not to see these two things as linked. And the university seems to be doubling down on its relationship with both the military-industrial complex and the Israel lobby. And you can see it in their investments. You can see it in the companies that they have speaking on campus. But again, all of this is an educational experience for both the students and the faculty. The biggest education they're getting isn't necessarily in the classroom, but it's learning about what these institutions that they're operating in, how they function, what pressures are acting on them, and how they can fight against it. Many students I've seen have told me that they were interested in some other career path beforehand, but watching what happened in Palestine, watching the university's response to 𝐓𝐡𝐞, watching the university's crackdown on pro-Palestine speech, it's radicalized them. It's made them decide that they want to fight for liberation for all. And I think that that is what organizers should be trying to do, trying to funnel this outrage, trying to funnel this confusion and this stupefaction into serious organization building. There's only one way that any liberation struggle has ever succeeded, and that's by people getting organized. And so that's what I hope that we're seeing here.
And we certainly hope that too. And you are involved in some of that organizing across Indiana, and we know that the situation at Indiana University is not dissimilar to what's happening at campuses across the country, where there is repression, there is smearing of anyone who speaks about Israel's genocide of Palestinians as an anti-Semite, and that this is being really driven from the top down with members of Congress pushing for McCarthyite witch hunts and smear campaigns at campuses across the country. There's a great deal more to talk about on all of this, and I hope we can have you back to do that soon, Bryce. And in the meantime, you are doing incredible work at Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. People can find your analyses there. And I read I read your piece on the coverage of Palestine and Gaza, but you also have really good analyses of how the media act as a propaganda mouthpiece on a whole range of issues, including Ukraine and Russia, among others. So I really hope that people will take a look at that, and that we would love for you to write more at the Electronic Intifada on all of these issues. So I hope you'll do that too. And how can people find you on social media?
Well, I'm mostly can be found on Twitter at the Green BJ, Green with an E at the end. I also have a Substack that's linked on my Twitter, and that's mostly where I sit.
Yeah, and if people just search for your name, Bryce Greene, they're going to find a lot of your writing and articles, because I know I did when I did that. And so I hope they will become more aware of your work. And thank you so much for coming on today, Bryce. We're going to leave it there. And I hope that
Thanks for having me.
Hope we'll continue the conversation soon. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. I think, yeah.
That was amazing. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, Bryce, thank you, Bryce, and thank you to Asa and you, Ali. Phenomenal segment. And of course, just as a reminder, we always edit these segments into standalone little pieces. So look for those on YouTube and on our social media as well. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. You're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman. We're going to turn to Jon and the latest resistance news. Hi, Jon.
Hi, guys. Great show so far. It was good to hear from Dr. Ali and hear from Bryce.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jon, the Palestinian resistance in Gaza has been involved in a fierce battle the past 2 weeks in Zaytoun, in the center of Gaza City. You did talk about it last week and showed us a field report from Islamic Jihad that said that they had used an exploded Israeli bomb. Let's start there, update the story for us, and talk about what's happening in Zaytoun.
Yeah, so last week, we talked about how there was an Islamic Jihad field report that was posted that the fighters explained that they had used a unexploded Israeli bomb that was sent. This is what the message said. It said, "In a complex engineering operation, we trapped a Zionist force in a precise ambush inside a building that was booby-trapped using an F-16 missile launched by the enemy towards civilian homes. It did not explode. Our engineers worked to activate it and detonate it in the vicinity of the Dawla Junction south of the Al-Zaytoun neighborhood in Gaza City." And we reported just on that field report, but the next day after our show, Islamic Jihad released a video of that operation. So maybe we can go to number one here, Tamara. So this is you can see here, we're looking at video from a building nearby. We can see an Israeli soldier outside of a Merkava tank. And Islamic Jihad identifies that building as an Israeli position during the Battle of Zaytun. This has been a 2-week operation where Israel reinvaded Gaza City. Zaytun is one of the busiest neighborhoods in Gaza City, and one of the areas that the Israelis claimed that they had operational control over months ago, but we've shown you week after week on this show that that's not the case. And you see the beginning of this complex operation. An RPG is fired at the building with the Israeli force in it. And then we can see here the F-16 missile is detonated in a massive explosion of the size that we have not seen before, and gives you a sense of both what it's like when these bombs are dropped on Palestinian civilians, as they have been throughout the war, but the impact of the fact that the Israelis have carried out 30,000 airstrikes using fighter jets, dropping munitions like this. So the names of these bombs, they get different names depending on the guidance system that they're using or which country is using them. But essentially, there's 3 types of bombs that are being dropped on Palestinians. There's Mark II, Mark III, and Mark IV bombs. The Mark II is 500 pounds, the Mark III is 1,000 pounds, and the Mark IV is 2,000 pounds. In each of these weapons, in the 500-pound bomb, there's more than 200 pounds of high explosives inside the munition. In the 1,000-pound bombs, there's 500 pounds of high explosives. And the 2,000-pound bombs have 950 pounds of high explosives. Now, all of these bombs that are being dropped on Gaza have a certain dud rate. The numbers are kept classified, but we know that that the bombs, although they've been proved in recent years, going back into previous decades, the dud rate can be as much as 1/3 of the weapons. And so even if you're correcting that statistic, what we're seeing happening in Gaza right now is scores, many, if not hundreds of these unexploded bombs that are all throughout civilian areas. And because of the size of the bombs, they can't be moved by hand. They require heavy equipment to move the unexploded ordnance. So what we're seeing here is Islamic Jihad actually not moving the bomb, re-engineering to explode the munition. And the Israelis admitted casualties on this operation that I reported last week, where they said that there was at least 7 injured and at least 2 additional killed. Both a platoon commander and a company commander were killed in this operation. So this is the first we've seen of a missile be reused in this way. We've seen field reports of them being used, but this is the first time that we've seen the weapon detonated like this. But this is a clue about what is coming for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because there are these dud bombs throughout the Gaza Strip that can be then reappropriated by the resistance and sent back to Israelis, which is something that we have seen in the past since Operation Cast Lead. After Cast Lead in 2008, 2009, the Qassam Brigades and Hamas set up an unexploded ordnance unit that went around and collected these weapons, because they have to be removed from houses before people can move back into their homes, or construction can happen in their homes. So there's a massive cleanup, a dangerous cleanup effort ahead in the Gaza Strip. But each of these weapons can be then used by the resistance. Really, we're looking at a generation of capacity that's being dropped on Gaza and unexploded. And just to give you a sense of how many of these, we saw in the congressional testimony the other day by the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, in that congressional hearing where he said that more than 25,000 women and children have been killed in Gaza, according to American intelligence numbers. At that same hearing, we learned that 21,000 bombs had been sent to Israel since October 7th, just since October 7th, 21,000. And we know that according to the Israelis, there's been 29,000 airstrikes using these munitions on Gaza. So just a little cause and effect there of the direct relationship between American weapons and the catastrophe that's happening in the Gaza Strip right now. So let's go maybe to number 3 here tomorrow, because this is another type of operation that the Qassam, all of these videos from the last week, all of them from the Battle of 𝐓𝐡𝐞. And here we see the Qassam brigades monitoring an IDF armored unit and underground setting setting a 𝐄𝐤𝐿 device underground, remotely detonated. The fighters are safe in a tunnel and detonating above ground against an Israeli force. And we're seeing now pictures from the area showing smoke from the burning vehicles that were hit by that ambush. And again, this is something that the tunnels are able to do. You can stack munitions inside the tunnels and detonate them. You can also lure the Israelis into booby-trapped buildings, which is what happened yesterday in Khan Yunis when the Israelis admitted to 13 casualties in a booby-trapped tunnel in Khan Yunis. And we haven't seen a lot of tunnel operations. And as I said earlier on in the war, the only way that the Israelis are going to achieve their goals that they set out for Gaza is if we see a lot of underground operations. Because we know that there's hundreds of kilometers of tunnels that the Palestinians are using. Well, yesterday, the Israelis said that they just finished closing off the tunnel that we showed you on this program in early December, the tunnel in the north, the attack tunnel that was so large that cars were driving through it. The Israelis only yesterday finished with concrete, with explosives, sealing that tunnel. Whatever that is, 3 full months later. And that gives you a sense of how challenging a task it is and how we're not seeing that happening throughout the Gaza Strip, because the tunnel that they closed in the north, that tunnel is not in a built-up area. So the Israelis were actually able to work in that area in relative freedom compared to the other places that they would have to operate to contain this tunnel network. And so we heard, of course, that they were going to flood the tunnels. We haven't heard much about that because it obviously doesn't work. And we know from this tunnel example in the north that it takes them months to just close a single tunnel, and they're not closing the routes into that tunnel. We know that from the Israeli captives that have been released, that the tunnel network in Gaza is effectively a spider web. It's not straight corridors between two places. So you can see the fighters wiring in this video here below ground, and now they're seeing a cameraman above ground. And again, we are seeing in these operations multiple levels of communication, and then these videos are being released immediately to the public. So we're not seeing anything like the comms network being shut down during this massive operation into 𝐓𝐡𝐞. So let's go to the next one here tomorrow, because we have another way that Palestinians are setting bombs. This is a 𝐄𝐤𝐿 above ground. This is an explosively formed penetrator, which is used against armored vehicles. We can see a fighter here moving to an embankment that the Israelis have created on this street in order to protect their armored vehicle corridors. And we see a fighter moving with the 𝐄𝐤𝐿 device out to the roadside, and then fighters above ground watching from a window as the device is set off against Israeli armored columns. And if we watch just one more time when we're going through, we can see this at 10 seconds of this video here. You can see, if you look at the building that's ahead there, that building is still smoking. So these are active battlefields that the Palestinians are operating on. And the Israelis are believing that by sending a belt of fire in advance of their armored vehicles, that they're preventing the resistance from operating. But it's clear from these videos that that's not the case. Instead, they're ending up targeting civilians that are in these homes, not the fighters that are participating in this battle. And the Battle of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 was a division level battle. It was more than 10,000 Israeli soldiers invading Gaza City in an area that the Israelis said that they had already cleared Qassam fighters from. And they needed 10,000 soldiers and a 2-week operation. And according to their objectives of digging up the tunnel network that splits the Gaza Strip, that carries from the north to the south of the Gaza Strip, they weren't able to carry out that operation of that tunnel operation. So it appears that the resistance in Zaytun prevented that, and the Israelis withdrew on the weekend. And that's when we saw what Nora was reporting on at the beginning of this show, the brutal atrocities of killing Palestinian civilians who are bound with handcuffs, bound and then run over while alive by tanks. Just horrific finds that are that we only see in Zaytun because the Israelis pulled out. These horrors are waiting in places that people haven't come back home to, which is a whole other level of this conflict that we are going to see once the Israelis pull back and Palestinians are allowed to go back to their homes. The murder of civilians that we've, that Nora documented in the news report really well. Let's do number 5 here tomorrow. So this is a 𝐓𝐡𝐞 operation. You can see them watching an armored bulldozer here from, I don't know how, for people that are listening, we're looking at an armored bulldozer that's only feet away from the fighters. And here we have 𝐓𝐡𝐞, the armed wing of Islamic Jihad. We can see this unit, and one of the things about the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 videos is that they tend to follow the fighters longer than the Qassam videos, which are more tightly edited. So we actually can see the fighters move from their positions inside a house where they monitored the bulldozer and then exit the house safely, moving through walls, moving under brush, and then attacking that vehicle that they were right beside in the building from an angle that's more advantageous than firing from the position they were in. All of these things pointing to, again, there doesn't appear to be any degradation to the overall operations of the resistance. And now we're watching an Islamic Jihad fighter, a set of fighters here laying a minefield, using various types of explosives, moving through the rubble that Israel believes, because they've destroyed this building, that it's no longer of military purpose. But the fighters are using it, using the undergrowth, and wiring. And the fighter here is holding what looks to be a claymore mine, which is an anti-personnel mine that would be used within the minefield. And you can see the fighter here burying this roadside bomb in the foliage and creating a minefield. And so we've seen this in the field reports when the fighters talk about minefields and detonating minefields among Israeli forces. But this is one of the first videos that we've actually seen them, the detail that goes into laying that operation. And again, you can see that they start this operation within feet of the Israeli troops. So there's nothing like clearing, which is what the term that the Israelis use, that they're clearing these areas. There's clearly that's not the case. And we can see with this significant roadside charge that's laid here, you can see the fighters here. We're watching them climb out the windows, stay along the walls for protection against the drones that are constantly watching from the air. We're seeing them now move through holes in buildings that they've knocked out, mouse holes to move around. And then he'll move into the street here and fire. And maybe we can switch to the next one after he fires here tomorrow. The fighter moves. It's unclear the result of that. Now we're seeing here is a Qassam tunnel operation in Zaytun, and we're seeing the fighter poke the last foot of topsoil off and expose the attack tunnel here. And he pops up, for people listening, within, again, 25 feet of an armored vehicle, and fires a Yasin at him. And so this is an interesting view. We've seen a number of these tunnel operations, but we can see with this footage, that they don't dig these tunnels until they're ready to be used in the operation. Once the Israeli position is set, they can see through their tunnel network, which they have mapped and the Israelis have not, and see where the best place to exit the tunnel to attack Israeli forces. And this is something that you see in all kinds of Israeli field reports of their own, talking about fighters coming up behind them, coming up through areas that they believed that they had cleared and attacking them from behind. So we're seeing in this Battle of Zaytun a 360 degrees ambush of Israeli forces, and you're seeing it fought in 3 dimensions. You're seeing it fought from above, with shooters using elevated positions to fire from above. You're seeing them attack on the ground level. And now we're seeing them attacking underground using the attack tunnel, which is covered. And then the Israelis have the decision, once this tunnel has hit this tank, which is too close for the tank's active protection system to engage. So all of the vaunted Israeli technical superiority is nullified by the Palestinians' ability to use tunnels and to use their homemade RPG rounds that are still not showing any sign of depleted resources. This is Israel reinvading Gaza City after 2 months, and the fighters in Gaza City are still showing up with the same weapons, using appropriate weapons for the situation. There doesn't appear to be any shortage of these in these videos that we're watching. And again, these videos that I'm showing you today are all from the past week. We're still covering just the day-to-day battle on the ground. Once the ceasefire takes hold, we can maybe rearrange some of these videos and show them in themes. But at this point, we're still covering the day-to-day resistance. So we can see a tank hit there. And we saw footage. We won't show it on our show to keep these videos up, but we saw footage leaked today, or shown by the Israelis on their TikTok channels, of a Yasin round penetrating one of their armored vehicles and clearly very seriously wounded soldiers inside those vehicles. And so the vehicles are being penetrated by these rounds, especially in the case that we're seeing here with something that is so close. And again, the fighters are returning to their base safely. These are not martyrdom missions. Maybe we can go to number 7 here tomorrow, because we see the Yasins being used in all different ways. Again, using the Yasin 105, the most dangerous of their anti-tank weapons, light, portable, easy to use. And we're seeing them use the undergrowth here. We're watching them walk between buildings through holes in the buildings and coming out in firing positions. This one looks like it's about 100 feet away from the vehicle. And you can see there the Yasin round flying through the air. So they've got cameraman, multiple Yasin shooters carrying out ambushes with these weapons that are that clearly do damage. Here we're watching a Merkava 4 tank and a tandem 85 be fired at that. And we see it being fired down the alleyway of this street, which prevents the radar system that you can see there on the side of the tank. The trophy active protection system requires radar to find the incoming round and respond to it by firing out. When you're firing between buildings, when you're firing from under the foliage, or what we're looking at here, firing from the blown out wall of a building that has coverage on it, it takes longer for the radar to pick that up. And you can see in that clip the Yasin round go flying past. So we're seeing multiple shooters and cameramen involved in these operations. We're watching them move through walls, which is something we've seen throughout this battle. And the longer the Israelis operate in this area, the more ability the indigenous fighters who live in this neighborhood otherwise are able to navigate the destruction that Israel has caused, which amounts to, and we've talked about this on other programs as well, it amounts to military vandalism, what's happening, because they're not removing the military efficacy of these buildings that we're watching. We're watching fighters firing out of buildings that have been tank shelled, but the building is still standing. There's no military purpose to it. And as you can see on the Israeli TikTok videos, when they're celebrating and cheering over this, they're not picking military targets and then all cheering. They're picking soft targets and blowing up things in their videos that don't have anything to do with the battle. And as you can see in these videos, the battle space that they've created through this destruction is then used by the Palestinians to attack them. Maybe we go to the next one then, Tamara. So again, we're not seeing random pot shots. We're not seeing the remnants of the resistance. We're still seeing these groups fighting in their formations. All the resistance groups filed reports throughout the battle in Zaytoun. We're watching largely �2 and Saraya al-Quds because of the qualitative nature of their attacks. They have more fighters and better equipment. And we're watching here a video of an RPG being fired by Saraya al-Quds literally over the kitchen sink. And the Israelis have just shelled that wall out of the house. And this is when we're talking about partially destroyed houses. That's not a partially destroyed house, even though in the UN reports that would be considered a partially destroyed house. When your wall's been taken out of your kitchen, your house isn't partially destroyed. And here we see a Saraya al-Quds fighter using a loophole knocked out of the wall to fire RPGs. Multiple fighters, and we can see in this video, multiple fighters with RPGs. So we're seeing RPG ambushes that are taking place, multiple shots at the same vehicle, which again, because of the active protection system, it's difficult for it to reload fast enough to deal with a second round incoming. Also, the armor of the vehicles, if they're hit once, are significantly weakened for a second round. So what we're seeing here is Saraya al-Quds firing multiple rounds of their RPGs. And we're seeing single warheads here, and we're looking at the armored column of the IDF moving through Zaytoun during this battle. And again, it was a division level battle, 10,000 soldiers involved in this fight in an area where the Israelis claimed that they had absolute operational control months ago, which is just clearly not the case. Maybe we go to the next one tomorrow, number 9. And this is another Qassam operation. Again, fighters out in the streets and able to move. And one of the reasons the fighters are able to move in the streets this way is because the Israeli soldiers are scared to get out of their armored vehicles. And so they have no way of containing these kind of operations where a fighter watches the vehicles pass them from a safe point in the building, and then moves out in the street and hits them from behind in the most vulnerable spot on the armored vehicles. Here we're seeing a D9 armored bulldozer being hit. And Israel doesn't say how many armored bulldozers they have, but we do know about their numbers of their other armored vehicles. And we know that we have seen, as I reported last week, old armored vehicles, M113s, that the Israelis had said were taken out of service in 2014 and also in 2004. Let's go to the next one here, 10 tomorrow. This is fighters using an elevated position to hit a Merkava tank here from a couple 100 feet max. And you can see the two-stage warhead there fire. The initial warhead is launched, and then the second charge flies out from the initial charge. Here we're going to watch an armored vehicle flying an Israeli flag, passing the fighters who use a hole in the building to hit the back of the tank before the active protection system can be activated. And so that's hitting the back door of their armored vehicle, which is what the footage from today showing the Israelis in the back of their armored vehicle. That's what that looked like, a hit from behind, because there's multiple soldiers in the aft part of in the fore part of the tank that don't seem to be injured. The people in the back seem to be critically injured in that footage that we're seeing today. Again, RPG Yassins, indigenously produced clones of an effective anti-tank weapon that we're seeing in numbers that we've seen throughout the war. No indication of shortages of supplies, no drop in the tenor and cadence of resistance operations anywhere which has been the case for 100 years in Palestine. Anywhere there's Israelis, there's resistance. Anywhere there's Israeli forces, there's resistance. And whatever the battlefield allows, that's where the fight takes place. Sometimes it takes place in the form of boycotts and general strikes. Sometimes it takes the shape of children throwing stones at tanks. And in Gaza here, we're seeing the resistance fighting with Palestinian-made weapons that they have prepared for the battle. And we're clearly seeing in this video damage being done. You can see the round incoming on that freeze frame as well. And clearly a direct hit on the back of that armored vehicle. So maybe let's go to number 11 here, Tamara, because all of these operations lead to this. This is a Namr troop carrier, 𝐐𝐿 watching. This is the best footage, the closest footage we've seen of this, of extracting destroyed armored vehicles that the 𝐐𝐿 brigades are recording from right up close. And you can see, for people listening, you can see the tow chain connecting the armored vehicle and extracting the troop carrier after it. And so we know that the Israelis, according to the International Institute for Strategic Studies military balance, which is the main industry industry journal for the arms trade and for international militaries, they indicate that the Israelis have 400 Merkava Mark IV tanks, 700 Mark IIIs, both of which we've seen in these videos today being hit, and 200 Namr troop carriers. According to 𝐐𝐿 figures, they've carried out 1,200 Yasin operations against Israeli armored vehicles, more than 900 of them tanks, 100 troop carriers, like we're seeing right there. That's one of the 100, and 100 armored bulldozers. And at some point, the Israelis aren't able to maintain this level of operation. It's one of the reasons why they're stalling the operation into Rafah. They're also rotating their forces out of Khan Yunis, where over the last week there's also battles in Khan Yunis. And so we're seeing the Israeli military being forced to repair their gear. This gear is not an easy fix. You don't just put a metal strip on it and carry on. Especially damage to the hull, a pierce to the hull, is a months-long fix before these vehicles are back in the field. So these are clearly significant damage being done, and these numbers at some point might explain why we saw the M113s last week in Khan Yunis, although there was a report in 𝐓𝐿𝐿 𝐈𝐴 this week that suggested that the M113s might be actually unmanned and being used as weapons shuttles. That may be the case for those M113s that we saw last week on the show, because they were both destroyed completely. So that's one possibility, but the significant possibility is that the Israelis are stretched thin. They have forces on the border with Lebanon in the north, which they're promising to attack to move Hezbollah forces off the border. The West Bank is preparing for Ramadan and is on fire. As I've said multiple times on this show, would be called an intifada at any other time. There's armed struggle throughout the West Bank that requires Israeli armored vehicles. And then you have the tempo of this operation in Gaza. So there's it's clear that they're running thin and also need to have a break. It's part of the reason why there's this timeline before Ramadan about the invasion of Rafah. So let's go to the last one here, Tamara, because this is a Palestinian fighter, and he's about to fire 120 millimeter mortar rounds at the Israelis. He says, "We promise Netanyahu, who wants to dismantle the 𝐐𝐿 brigades, that it is us who will dismantle your forces and send your soldiers back home in coffins." So we see the Palestinian fighters communicating and releasing these videos immediately, responding to news during an intense battle in Zaytun. And still we're seeing the fighters able to communicate in this way. And this video with the fighter shows the highlights of that video that I parsed out. We're seeing the tank being towed. We see the fighters move through holes in the walls. And we're seeing fighters communicate and being aware of what's going on in the outside world and responding immediately. In some of these videos from 𝐤𝐿 this last week, we saw the date written on it and the day of it being released. So these videos are being promptly sent out from their information operations arm. And so based on these videos and what we're seeing on the ground, the operation in Zaytun wrapped up. The Israelis withdrew from Zaytun, and that's when we saw the horrors that Nora reported on. So that's the resistance update from this last week. And again, every video that I just showed you was from the past week, and there's still more than enough that we're able to show in these segments. So the resistance continues.
Yeah, no kidding. Thank you so much, Jon, as always, for that just as meticulous report from the ground. Ali and Asa, do you have any questions, any comments about what?
Yeah, I have lots, but I'll try to limit myself. And I can usually not wait. I usually like to do that during Jon's presentation, but I've been very patient and riveted by watching that analysis, Jon. But what I think we're seeing, what you've showed us, is that the resistance is continuing, and the fact that the Israelis had to go back to Zaytun, which is one of the first areas they invaded, and today is March 7th. So, it seems unbelievable that it has been 5 months of genocide, 5 months of relentless killing. And they are still facing determined and skillful resistance all over the Gaza Strip, and in Khan Yunis in the north, in Gaza City. And I think it's so important to understand this because it tells us, it's important to understand in the context of all the reports and speculation about a ceasefire, because the resistance has been very clear that for example, Osama Hamdan, who is a senior spokesperson for Hamas, said the other day that Israel will not win at the negotiating table what it has been unable to take on the battlefield. And there are all sorts of efforts by the United States and Israel to pressure the resistance to accept a short temporary truce, to allow Israel to retrieve its prisoners of war and its captives who are in Gaza, and then resume the genocide. And what the resistance is saying is, no, there has to be a complete end to the genocide and unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid and supplies into Gaza, as well as, of course, the release of Palestinian prisoners and some other minimum conditions that they have not backed off on. So I guess those are my comments, but also my question for Jon is, Jon, do you see the military situation on the ground and the ongoing activities of the resistance as being capable of backing up that negotiating position?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. The Israelis just rotated their force that was in Khan Yunis, fighting for 3 months in Khan Yunis, and they came up with nothing. No information about captives, unable to defeat 𝐤𝐿 in Khan Yunis, no leadership killed. The Israelis are not achieving any of their objectives on the ground. They're not returning any of their captives, and 𝐐𝐿 has said from the beginning that that's not going to happen. And so the only way that these, especially the soldiers, I think the resistance has given concessions on the civilian element of the exchange and are willing to take a temporary pause, if that temporary pause includes hundreds of trucks all over the Gaza Strip of aid, that they'll complete what could have been completed in November of the exchange of civilians. But there's no way Israel's getting back its soldiers without serious negotiations and a massive prisoner release. They're not going to achieve that on the battlefield. Their only way to achieve that is in negotiations. And so the Americans seem to be right now very invested in postponing the operation in Rafah, but they just keep getting humiliated by the Israelis. These airdrops are just humiliating the Americans. They have absolutely no control over this country that they've given 21,000 bombs to just since the beginning of this war. That they're dropping airdrops for people. They're just being humiliated. Egypt's being humiliated. There is no result that's coming of this war that doesn't involve a diplomatic negotiation. And the negotiation is tied to each of the fronts, because the war in the north isn't going to stop unless there's a prisoner exchange. That's the basic understanding of the all groups fighting right now. The Ansar Allah fighting in Yemen is to end the blockade, get food into the Palestinians. So that can be done immediately, diplomatically. Israel can return its captives diplomatically by releasing thousands of Palestinians that it holds in its prisons, that we're watching on their TikTok videos being tortured and collected as bargaining chips. Israel isn't able to achieve its military goals, and there's splits within their war cabinet because the generals within Israel know that that's the case, that they're not getting them back without negotiations. And even the Mossad chief said the other day that not getting aid to the north is preventing a prisoner exchange for the soldiers that the Israelis are in a conscription army, are showing their entire nation that they're not going to come and get you. They're going to leave you in tunnels for months and months on end. And that, as we've seen from the captives that are released, the biggest threat to the captives are the same threat that is to all of the people in the Gaza Strip. It's the Israeli army that is the threat to them. And 𝐐𝐿 said the other day that there may be as many as 70 of the Israeli captives have been killed by Israeli bombing. So they can't achieve on the battlefield what they can't achieve the release of their prisoners on the battlefield, no matter how many times Netanyahu says it. And all Israel's doing by delaying this is deepening its lack of legitimacy in the international community, and creating a catastrophe for Palestinians that is one of the most violent wars and destructive wars that we've seen since World War II. And that the same newspapers that attack independent media are the newspapers that have attempted to figure out if this is the most devastating attack since World War II. And some say, the bombing of Germany, that this is equivalent to the bombing of Germany. Some said that there's, periods of the war in Korea. These newspapers are trying to find parallels and going back 2 generations to find this kind of destruction. The special rapporteur on food said that they've never seen so many people go so hungry so fast before. They've just created acute malnutrition throughout the entire society instead of negotiating for the release of their own people. It's really unbelievable what we're watching, and Hamas's statements that you quoted, Ali, have been consistent all along that that's the case. They're not going to surrender Palestinians aren't going to surrender. They're not going to run into Egypt. They're not going to leave their homes. You've seen enough videos of Palestinians refusing to leave to know that they're not going to do that. So the amount of destruction that Israel causes is not going to lead to the surrender of the Palestinians. We know that.
Jon, while you were doing your segment, the Associated Press reported that tonight, Genocide Joe Biden is making a State of the Union address in which he says that the U.S. is going to establish a temporary port on the Gaza coast, quote, increasing the flow of humanitarian aid for the beleaguered territory. I mean, what do we make of this? They're doing anything they can to provide. I mean, obviously, this is yet another propaganda stunt, a PR move to increase his chances of people, voting for him. The Americans are doing they're doing anything they can to not do what they need to do.
Yeah, I mean, this comes 2 days after Super Tuesday, when in a number of states, I think it's something like 10 states, people go and vote in the primary elections.
Yeah.
And for viewers who are outside the US, that's where people go and vote for who they want as the candidate for whichever party they vote for. So obviously, Donald Trump is almost certain to be the Republican candidate, and Joe Biden is certain to be the Democratic candidate if he continues, let's say. But in Minnesota, for example, there was a 20% uncommitted vote in the Democratic primary, and uncommitted, it means that people are going to register a protest against Joe Biden. And this was far bigger than anyone expected. It was a massive uncommitted vote. And the days after, or a week after, the same thing happened in Michigan. But what's incredible to me about this story is that it says that Joe Biden will announce a plan in his State of the Union address for the U.S. military to help establish a temporary port. That's weird. Are they going to send the U.S. military openly to Gaza? And then, again, it is, to me, avoiding the issue of why aid isn't getting in. Why do they need a port? They don't need a port. There are roads that go into Gaza.
There are many.
There are many roads that go into Gaza.
All full of trucks.
Yeah,
waiting right there.
For months.
2000, there were satellite photos taken a week ago that showed something like 2,000 trucks waiting at the Rafah crossing. And aid official after aid official after aid official says the reason the trucks are not getting in is because Israel will not allow them in. And we've seen time and again the Israelis not just blocking aid that gets in, but when a trickle of aid does get in, and we heard Dr. Arham Ali telling us it's a trickle of aid getting in, and he was just in Gaza, the Israelis bomb, shoot, and kill people who are trying to get this meager aid. And we saw the airdrops, which, as you said in the news report, Nora, that Tamara Nassar and I called humanitarian aid theater, a stunt. And I think I saw a statistic. It was something like, these airdrops, each one of them drops something like, is it 6 tons of aid, something in that order. Let's just be realistic about this. That is the equivalent with all this drama, all these planes, the photo ops, 6 tons of aid, 1 airplane of aid. That's the equivalent of a truckload. a truckload?
It's actually less than that, Ali. It's 3 and 4 metric tons for an airdrop, and there's 18 metric tons on a truck.
Okay,
so there could be
right.
as many as 5 times
Wow.
as much on these trucks. It's a crime that we're watching these.
Yeah, and
airdrops.
then of course, all right. Thank you for that, John. So we're talking about less than a truckload per airdrop that is not being distributed in any organized or rational way. So it's less than a truckload per airdrop that is not getting to where it needs to be. So,
and it's
again,
not what they need. It's dropping individual ready-to-eat meals, right? They're dropping packets, like military packets with one meal. So they're not actually even dropping appropriate food that can then
Right.
be shared by the Palestinians that we've
Right.
watched them set up these community kitchens where
kitchens.
everybody is sharing food. They're dropping from these airdrops ready-to-eat meals.
They look like expired airline meals to me, if you've seen
Yeah.
some of these photos. But my point here is that this isn't about, there are no roads, or Israel doesn't want to let the aid in. So if they're not letting it in by road, why would they let it in by sea? Israel controls the sea, coastal along Gaza. It's been shooting and murdering Palestinian fishers for years. So again, it comes down to, this is theatrics. This is an announcement that is just designed to push the pressure off the administration, to try to give talking points to Democratic Party shills so they can go out and say, oh, look at what Joe Biden is doing. And this is pie in the sky, because, even if people are fooled into thinking this is a good idea, well, you don't build a port in a day. It's going to take some time. So be patient.
Because Israel destroyed the port.
Israel has destroyed the port in Gaza. So the point here is that if Joe Biden wants to end the starvation in Gaza, wants to bring medicine to those babies that Dr. Arham Ali saw and treated and in many cases couldn't save, the way to do that is for the United States to order Israel to open the roads, to open the ghetto gates, the gates of the death camp Gaza, and let the aid in. And you think the United States can't order Israel to do that? Yes, they can, because the United States can turn that tap of the weapons and munitions and bombs and guns. And I don't care what anyone says about the Israel lobby. And we had that discussion with Professor John Mearsheimer last week. Yes, the Israel lobby is powerful. We know it's powerful, but still, nothing can, not even the Israel lobby, can stop Joe Biden from picking up the phone right now and saying to the Pentagon, stop the airlift of bombs, stop the resupply of spare parts, stop the sharing of intelligence data or satellite imagery that Israel is using for targeting. He could do that right now, and the aid would start to flow. Am I wrong about that?
No, that's exactly right. And just to say, and they should open the port, because Gaza should have a port, and people should be allowed to deliver aid to that port and deliver and export their strawberries and whatever it is that any other sovereign nation has the right to. The Palestinians should have the right to their own border. The fact that all of their borders exist inside the state of Israel is the fundamental crime that we're having all of this catastrophe piled on top of a 17-year siege that completely allows Israel to control day-to-day life in the most unbelievable way. And so let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. The port should happen. The maritime corridor should happen. Make Biden make the port happen, and then tell Indonesia and any of these countries, Turkey, to float a flotilla of aid in, because the French have these ships that are medical ships. They have ships that are electricity generators. They could pull up a ship on the coast and power Gaza and put it back online, put the hospitals to allow the hospitals to use electricity. Those ships
can be floated in. You can't build a port in a day, but you can allow those ships to come in a day, a hospital ship, an electricity ship, ships that bring enough food that you don't have to worry about these trucks that are lined up, because the ships can unload significantly more than that are on those trucks. All of those things should be happening. The port is an absolute requirement to break the siege, and it should be part of any diplomatic deal that the Palestinians and Israelis come up with to resolve, and Hezbollah, because they're involved in this now too in the north, should be demanding that there's port access in Gaza. And it's crazy that Joe Biden is the one to be saying that, because it's such an obvious thing that should have been happening and should be demanded by the international community, that Gaza be allowed to have its own port.
Along with the fully functioning crossings that have been sealed up by Israel. And not just over the last 5 months, but over the last 17 years of this blockade that has become normalized now. Absolutely atrocious. Any other comments or questions we have for each other before we wrap up and go to some comments? All right, Asa, where were people watching from today?
Yeah, well, I did ask in the chat earlier on, so bear with me here. I've got loads. So clear my throat. We had people, we had viewers.
We
This is
have
only
people
YouTube.
from Brazil tuning in today, and we've had people from Tunis, and I'm seeing Ireland, Nottinghamshire, England, Irvine, California, Austin, Texas, Cyprus, Ankara, Turkey. Someone says they're in cyberspace. From the Basque Country, shout out to Ontario, Canada, Australia, Toronto. Anyone else we know in Toronto, I wonder? Lots of people in Canada. Owen Sound, Ontario. Devon in the UK, which I've been to. It's a beautiful part of the UK. Portugal, Wales, South Africa, Hyderabad, India, France, San Diego, California, Calgary, Canada, Florida. That person says they'd rather be in Russia. Washington, D.C., the heart of the beast. Alberta in Canada. That's a few of them. What have I missed, Asa? That was fun reading that out. I took your role there for a second because I enjoyed doing that.
What does this say?
That's too small for me to read on my screen. Let's see.
Gaza, Palestine. Gaza, Palestine.
Yes, Gaza, Palestine. Yes, repeating Gaza, Palestine. So we definitely share that belief, and but the point here, the reason we and I'm seeing people keep putting Algeria, Uganda, Sierra Leone, Rome, Italy, Pennsylvania, San Francisco, the Czech Republic, Vancouver, lots and lots of people in Canada really represented today. The Netherlands, Quebec, people can see that in the comments. But the point here, I mean, we really wanted to know where people are watching from, because, again, to remind ourselves and each other that we are the global majority. Someone wrote to me, one of our friends and viewers and readers wrote to me the other day and said that, telling me about a contribution they'd made to UNRWA, and said, I know it's just a drop in the ocean. And I said, it may be a drop in the ocean, but we are the ocean. We are the ocean. We are all drops in the ocean. And it is a global ocean of, it's a wave, a huge wave of horror, of disgust, of solidarity, and of determination to end this genocide. So it's just so wonderful to see people from all over the world here today.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. Any other comments about our guest, Asa?
Let's see. Well, there was so many of. Well, there's one here from Trinidad and Tobago, just to read out. We had loads of supportive comments as always for Bryce earlier on in the show. Bryce has a brilliant perspective. Bryce Greene, thank you for bringing Bryce Greene's work to my attention, and good luck in your work for justice. We had one viewer saying we need a live stream where Tamara is the guest. I fully endorse.
Absolutely.
Well, on that, we also had a comment about advertising Tamara's interview discussion with Stephen Salaita on the podcast. So go and check that out.
It's stunning. It's stunning.
We're
fantastic.
We absolutely are.
Yeah. And let me see what else. This viewer said, "Thank you, Jon. It's always very enjoyable to watch the resistance in action." People send a lot of support to you as well, Nora, for reading out the news, the horrible headlines of the news. So, thank you all for writing in. I can see the chat is actually going crazy right now. Thank you to everyone. We can't actually read out everything, but thank you very much.
Thank you. And Ali, do you want to say a few words about tomorrow's interview with Stephen?
I do. I want to just shout out a few of the things that are at the Electronic Intifada on our YouTube channel right now that I really hope people will watch and listen to and share. One is Tamara's interview with Stephen Salaita, the Palestinian author and academic. And it's absolutely brilliant. Tamara, I don't know if you can just show people how to find that on the YouTube channel. And on our YouTube channel, another amazing thing this week is, in addition to Tamara's conversation with Stephen Salaita, Nora, is your conversation with Matteo Capasso, which is the second item there. How Zionism pushes liberalism into decay. And I really enjoyed listening to that. It was so thoughtful. You know, we spend a lot of time thinking about these things, but still, it really gave me some big picture ideas of how to understand why the West is so determined to crush Palestine and why the cause of Palestine is central to so many people around the world in terms of the possibility of liberation and the possibility of a different kind of future, the ability to imagine and bring about a future of liberation. So that's a fantastic one. And then, so right below that, you can see Tamara's discussion with Stephen Salaita. Stephen was, Stephen is someone we need to hear more from. So I hope we will have him back for more discussions. Maybe he'll even come on the live stream because he has a new book coming out, which they talk about, but we might like to get him back for a longer discussion. And maybe we can hop over to the website, Tamara, and just again to introduce new viewers, the Electronic Intifada. We are a full publication. It's not just this live stream in the YouTube channel, but we are publishing original journalism every day. Tamara, hold there for a second, just so we can look at some of the stories. Right there, we have a piece, a very moving piece by Lubna Ahmed Abu Sitta about one of her teachers who was killed by Israel in Gaza. And that's a reminder that this genocide is also systematically targeting intellectuals and academics and doctors in Gaza. And so that's a horrifying personal loss for her, but it's also part of the intended destruction of the Palestinian people. The piece next to that on the right there is by Susan Abul Hawa, the Palestinian writer and novelist, who just spent 2 weeks in Gaza. And she, this piece is really tough reading, but it's very important. She says it's worse than she could ever have imagined there. And if we scroll down, you can see we continue to have the reporting from our colleagues who are in Gaza right now. Amjad Yari is in Gaza, and he's writing about just the things that many of us take for granted, the ability to charge our phone. But it's a matter of life and death for people in Gaza, and it is sometimes something you have to risk your life for, to go and find somewhere where you can charge your phone or find a phone signal to communicate with loved ones, or to access something like your bank account, because sometimes you have to have internet to do those basic things. We have a piece by our colleague 𝐓𝐿𝐿 𝐄𝐿 who is also in Gaza. She's reporting from Gaza, and she speaks and she reports on survivors of the infamous flour bag massacre. So we continue to publish original reporting from Gaza every single day. We're very proud to be publishing the work of our colleagues there. And whenever we can have them on, we will. But as you know, it's so difficult to get any kind of stable connection to Gaza. So in the meantime, they are still speaking. They are not silent. They are speaking through these written words that we want people to read and to share and to help us spread. Nora, you want to talk about how people can learn more and potentially support us if they want to?
Absolutely. So yeah, the most valuable, support day in and day out is to have our readers and viewers and listeners like and share and read our phenomenal reporting, obviously, and stay in touch with us by signing up for our email list. You can see down there at the bottom crawl that Tamara has put down there. Go to electronicintifada.net. At the very top left where it says get updates, you can sign up to our email list so that if we get taken off of these various platforms, we will still be able to keep in touch with you and vice versa. And then right under the banner there at the Electronic Intifada on the top, click the Donate Now button to keep us vital and strong. We pay our writers everywhere from Gaza to Chicago. And for our contributors in Gaza, reporting and writing and publishing on the Electronic Intifada continues to be a lifeline. So if you are inclined to help keep our Gaza contributors afloat in this catastrophic time, please do go over to our website and hit the Donate Now button. You can also become a monthly sustainer. And
those links are also, and there are also links directly in the description of the live stream video below.
Exactly. So yeah, and then head over to our YouTube channel, sign up, subscribe to our channel. You'll get notified when there is another live stream happening. It's a great way to keep in touch. And I just want to thank all of our viewers and listeners and readers, everyone who joined us on the show today, Dr. Arham Ali and Bryce Greene, Jon, Tamara, Ali, Asa, everyone at the Electronic Intifada. We can't do this without you and without each other. And next week we'll be back on our usual Wednesday schedule. Thank you all for tuning in. Till next time. Thank you.
Thank you.